They called him crazy. Then his producer was eliminated. Cocoa T's Rikers Island exposed the deadly truth about Jamaican immigrants in America years before the headlines caught up. This is the forbidden story of reggae's darkest warning, and how it came true in the most horrifying way possible. Watch this video now before it gets taken down by the authorities. The first time Calvin George Scott, known to the world as Cocoa T, stepped onto the chaotic streets of New York City, he was confronted not by the dazzling promises of the American dream, but by its cruel underbelly. They had warned him back in Rocky Point, a quiet fishing village in Clarendon Parish, that America was not just the land of opportunities. It was also a place where one wrong move could dismantle everything. They told him, learn a trade, stay in school, and above all, do not become a fool. The warnings echoed in his mind like the bass line of a dub plate, a constant rhythm of caution beneath the noise of the city. If a single song could ever be said to encapsulate a man's essence, then Cocoa T's Rikers Island would be that very mirror. Its melody was sticky sweet, his vocals dripped with a deceptive ease, and beneath the sugar lay an iron message. The track was not merely a hit. It was a cipher, a map to understanding the complexities and contradictions of the man who sang it. And like all true maps, it pointed to a hidden treasure but warned of the dangers lurking along the way. Cocoa T was not a stranger to hardship. Born Calvin Scott, he had learned early that Jamaica's shimmering beaches and swaying palms hid brutal truths. Political enforcers, street violence, and poverty were woven into the fabric of life as intimately as the melodies sung by fishermen as they cast their nets. And it was in these turbulent waters that another figure had learned to swim. Henry Junjo Laws, a man whose journey from Kingston's rough streets to the glimmering lights of New York would become a cautionary tale for the ages. Junjo Laws had risen from the blood-stained soil of Jamaica's political violence. In the 1970s and early 1980s, the island nation had been a battlefield, and young men like Junjo were foot soldiers in political wars that left Kingston streets soaked in blood. But fate, or perhaps sheer stubbornness, had other plans for him. Rescued from the abyss by veteran producers Bunny Lee and Niney the Observer, Junjo traded his fire weapons for grooves and built a formidable career as one of Jamaica's top reggae and dancehall producers. His Volcano label was synonymous with raw, unfiltered talent, and his roster glittered with the names that would define a generation. In 1985, at the absolute zenith of his powers, Junjo left Jamaica for the United States. He carried with him a treasure chest of talent, a burgeoning empire, and, perhaps unwittingly, the ghosts of his past. Among the bright jewels in his crown was Calvin Scott, whom he had discovered only a year earlier. Cocoa T, with his smooth voice and natural charisma, had already begun to etch his name into reggae history with tracks like Rocking Dolly, I Lost My Sonia, and Informer. Junjo and Cocoa T were an unstoppable force, one creating rhythms that roared like lions, the other taming them with a voice as gentle and devastating as a Caribbean storm. But America was not merely another market to conquer. It was a labyrinth, and Junjo, tragically, would not find his way out. Once in New York, the glittering promise of success quickly gave way to old habits and old friends. Junjo reconnected with comrades from his days in Kingston's political gangs, men who had swapped political allegiance for criminal empires. They called themselves the Jamaican Shower Posse, a name that would come to haunt headlines and terrify communities. Exactly how Junjo became entangled with the Shower Posse remains murky. Some say he was a willing participant, others that he was simply a man unable to sever the ties of loyalty forged in blood and desperation. But what is undeniable is that in a short span, Junjo Laws found himself arrested, tried, and sentenced to a 7-year prison term. His destination was not a studio lined with gold records, but Rikers Island, a grim fortress of human suffering situated in the East River, notorious as one of America's most brutal jails. Meanwhile, Cocoa T was forging his own path, watching from a distance as New York streets became a graveyard for the dreams of many young Jamaicans. He saw the Spanglers and the Coke Cowboys, rival gangs that turned the Big Apple streets into bloody battlegrounds. Youths barely out of adolescence were trading textbooks for hand-fire weapon, ambition for addiction, futures for funerals. The more Cocoa T saw, the heavier his heart grew. He could not ignore the revolving door of jail and death that was devouring his people. Music had always been his salvation, his way of translating sorrow into sound. And so, during a casual visit to Philip Smart's studio in Long Island, destiny struck. An instrumental track began to play. Simple, haunting, irresistible. It spoke to Cocoa T's soul, and in a flurry of inspiration, he wrote what would become Rikers Island. The song poured out of him in minutes. It wasn't just a song. It was a lament, a warning, a cry of despair and defiance. When he stepped into the recording booth and laid down the vocals, the studio vibrated with an almost spiritual energy. Those present were left stunned. They knew, instantly, that they had witnessed the birth of something extraordinary. Released under a Brooklyn label called Mr. Do, Rikers Island exploded onto the airwaves. It shot to the top of the US reggae charts with a velocity that left seasoned producers shaking their heads in disbelief. In Jamaica, it was no different. The song was an instant classic, a bittersweet anthem for a generation caught in the crossfire. Its success reverberated far beyond reggae circles, charting in countries across the globe and introducing Cocoa T's voice to audiences who had never set foot in Kingston or Brooklyn. And then came the Apollo Theater, a venue legendary for its unforgiving audiences. On that fateful night, Cocoa T shared the stage with the likes of Shabba Ranks, but it was Rikers Island that brought the house down. He sang it once, and the crowd roared. He sang it again, and the applause doubled. By the fourth encore, there was no doubt. Cocoa T had cemented his place in the pantheon of reggae greats. Yet even as he basked in his hard-earned success, the specter of Junjo Laws loomed. Released from Rikers Island in 1991, Junjo was immediately deported back to Jamaica. The world he returned to, however, had changed. Dancehall had evolved, shifting into the digital era, leaving behind the raw, analog sound that had once been Junjo's signature. He tried to rebuild, relocating to London in the mid-1990s in search of a new beginning. But some debts, it seemed, could never be repaid. On a fateful night in June 1999, Junjo Laws was eliminated in a drive-by fire weapon encounter. He was just 39 years old. Though the life-taking remains officially unsolved, many believe it was the inevitable consequence of a life that had danced too long on the blade's edge, a final brutal act in a tragedy that had been unfolding for decades. In the aftermath, Cocoa T's Rikers Island took on an even deeper resonance. It was no longer just a song. It was a eulogy, a testament, a warning etched into melody. Every time Cocoa T stepped onto a stage and crooned its haunting chorus, he wasn't merely entertaining. He was bearing witness. As the years passed, Rikers Island refused to fade. Audiences demanded it at every show, hungry for its bittersweet blend of beauty and sorrow. It became a ritual, a communal act of remembrance for those who had fallen prey to the very streets that had promised them everything and delivered only ruin. For Cocoa T, the success of Rikers Island was both a blessing and a burden. It immortalized his voice, but also tethered him to the memories it conjured, of friends lost, of futures squandered, of Junjo Laws, and so many others swallowed by a machine that chewed up ambition and spat out ghosts. Yet in that haunting melody, there was also hope. A reminder that music, at its best, is not merely a reflection of the world's cruelty, but a weapon against it. Cocoa T had taken the broken dreams of a generation and spun them into gold, forging from their ashes a legacy that endures. Thus, the story of Rikers Island and the cryptic warning Cocoa T sent through its verses is not just a chapter in the history of reggae. It is a chronicle of survival, a map for those who come after, navigating the treacherous waters where the American dream and the Jamaican struggle collide. And in the echoes of that song, even now, the message endures. Tread carefully, for the road is perilous. But with vigilance, perhaps, salvation is still possible. What do you think? Can music truly change the course of a generation? Or is it just a reflection of the struggles they face? Have we learned anything from the stories of those who chased dreams and found tragedy instead? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you want more untold stories of resilience and music history, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next.